In Alaska, the nights stretch longer than anywhere else in America. And in one small town, something has taken advantage of that darkness. I want to share with you a case that's been sitting heavy in my notes for a while now. It comes from a small town in Alaska, the kind of place where the streets freeze early and the nights stretch longer than they should. People there speak of something that comes after dark. They don't call it by name. Most won't even talk about it unless pressed. But their stories overlap in the same uneasy details. I've gathered 4 different accounts from people who lived through it. What they describe isn't easy to explain, but it's worth listening to. Account 1. I've lived in this town all my life. Fishing's the only work I've ever known, and nights on the water don't bother me. You get used to the dark when you spend enough time in it, but there was one night I'd trade anything to forget. It was late January, cold enough that the sea near the docks was crusting with ice. I'd been working late, repairing nets inside the old storage shed near my boat. The work was tedious. Winter storms had torn through my best gill net. The shed was cramped and poorly lit, just a single bulb hanging from the rafters. I'd been at it for hours when I heard it. A clacking sound, like 2 stones being struck together. At first, I thought it was ice shifting on the water, chunks breaking free and knocking against the dock pilings. The harbor made all sorts of strange sounds in winter. But as I listened, really listened, I realized the sound wasn't coming from the sea. It was coming from the road that ran parallel to the waterfront, and it was moving closer with each deliberate clack. The shed had a window, just a small square pane of glass that faced the street. When I pressed my face close and wiped away the condensation, I could see through it well enough. What I saw made my blood run cold. There was something on the street, moving through the pale glow of the streetlights. I couldn't make out much in the dark. Just a tall shape moving on 2 legs. Too tall for any person, maybe 7 or 8 feet, with its head ducked slightly forward as if it were trying not to be seen. I told myself it was a trick of the dark and the cold. But even as I tried to rationalize what I was seeing, something in my gut told me I was looking at something that shouldn't exist. Then it stopped. Right outside the shed, not 20 feet from where I crouched by the window, it stood there perfectly still, and I could see its silhouette more clearly. Impossibly tall and thin, with limbs that seemed too long for its body. Then it raised a hand, and I saw fingers that stretched like pale branches against the night, each one longer than any human finger should be. It tapped the window. Not a hard knock like someone demanding entry, just 3 soft, deliberate taps. Just enough to let me know it was there. I froze completely. My heart hammered so hard I was sure it would hear it. My breath fogged up the window, and for a terrifying moment, I couldn't see outside at all. When the condensation cleared, the thing was gone. I stayed in that shed until dawn, afraid to leave, afraid of what might be waiting in the dark. The next morning, I went out to check, certain I'd find nothing but snow drifted up against the wall. Instead, I found footprints, not boots, not hooves. Long impressions in the snow, wider than any man's foot, running up the street and past the houses. I didn't tell anyone at first, but I knew, even then, that it had seen me. And I knew it would come back. Account 2. It was my turn to stay home. Mom was working a late shift at the clinic, and Dad was out plowing roads. I wasn't scared, not at first. I'd grown up here. The nights are long, but they've always just been nights. I made myself some ramen, put on music, and tried not to think about how the wind sounds when it rattles against the siding. It was just after midnight when I heard the first knock. Not on the door, but on the roof. I muted the music immediately, thinking maybe ice had slid off one of the big pine trees that hung over our house. But then it happened again. 3 knocks, evenly spaced and deliberate, right above my head where I sat. I went completely still. The house was so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat drumming in my ears, could hear the old furnace cycling on in the basement. Then came another sound, different from the roof knocking. A clack, like someone snapping their nails against glass. It was coming from the living room window, just a few feet from where I sat, frozen on the couch. I didn't want to look. Every instinct I had screamed at me not to turn my head toward that window, but I had to. The sound kept coming, patient and persistent. Like whoever was making it knew I was listening and had all the time in the world. I crept toward the window, each step making the floorboards groan under my feet no matter how carefully I moved. The curtains were half open, just enough to show a slice of the glass and the darkness beyond. And pressed against that glass, palm flat and fingers spread wide, was a hand. It tapped once, twice against the glass, then slowly curled into a fist and knocked. Soft, almost polite. Like a neighbor asking to borrow sugar. The politeness of it was somehow worse than if it had been violent or demanding. This thing, whatever it was, had manners. I stumbled back, my legs hitting the coffee table. My chair tipped over with a crash that sounded impossibly loud in the silence. When I looked up again, heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst, the hand was gone. The window showed nothing but empty darkness and the faint outline of snow-covered trees. I spent the rest of the night huddled in the kitchen with all the lights on, clutching a baseball bat and jumping at every sound the old house made. I kept checking my phone, counting the hours until dawn, until Mom would come home and make everything normal again. When Mom came home at dawn, I told her what happened. She tried to laugh it off, said I'd been spooking myself in an empty house. But when she went to close the curtains, she stopped. There were smudges on the glass. Handprints. Too big to be mine. Account 3. You hear things when you've lived through as many winters as I have. Wolves in the tree line, owls calling out over the river, the groan of ice shifting on the lake. But that night, what I heard was none of those things. I'd gone to bed early, wrapped in blankets in my armchair, the wood stove burning low. Sometime past 2 in the morning, a sound woke me. At first I thought it was branches tapping against the siding, but the rhythm was too steady. Knock, knock, knock. Not hurried, not frantic, deliberate. I held my breath and listened, my old ears straining against the silence between the knocks. The sound moved slowly from one wall to another, circling the cabin with patience that made my skin crawl. Then it went up to the roof, sharp clacks that echoed through the rafters and made the whole structure shudder slightly. Whatever it was big enough to make the cabin shake, and it was circling me, pacing around my home in the dark like a predator sizing up its prey. I didn't get up, not at my age. I knew better than to invite it closer by peeking through a curtain. Instead, I sat in my armchair, staring at the stove, listening. The sounds continued for what felt like hours, sometimes on the roof, sometimes against the walls, always moving, always patient. Then it came to the window right beside my chair, the one that faced the clearing where I'd cut back the trees for firewood. A scraping started, like nails across glass, but worse, longer nails than any animal should have. Slow, long strokes, over and over, deliberate scratches that made my teeth ache. It wanted me to know it was there, wanted me to understand that only a thin pane of glass separated us. And then, God help me, Silas, the whispering started. Faint, broken words, spoken right against the pane. The voice was neither male nor female, but something caught between the two, something that had maybe once been human but had forgotten how. Couldn't make most of it out through the glass and the wind, except for one word, repeated over and over like a prayer. Come. I stayed there until the sky lightened, afraid even to breathe too loud. By morning, it was gone. But when I finally looked at the window, I saw streaks, not frost, not dirt. Greasy marks, like something had dragged its fingers down the glass. Account 4. I've spent my whole life in these woods, Silas. I know every sound, every track, every trick the wind plays at night. But this thing, it doesn't move like anything I've hunted. The first time I heard it was last February. I was sleeping light, rifle by the bed, when something rapped against the roof. At first I thought it was snow falling off the heavy branches that hang over the cabin. Then it came again, deliberate and measured. Knock, knock, knock. In a pattern that no falling snow ever made, like someone walking across the shingles with purpose. I pulled on my boots and coat, grabbed my rifle, and went outside. The snow was fresh and clean, unmarked except for my own boot prints from the day before. But when I craned my head up and squinted against the moonlight reflecting off the white, I saw the outline of something slipping over the peak of the roof. It moved wrong, too fluid for anything with bones. Long arms that seemed to stretch longer than they should, too long for any creature I knew. And that sound, that hollow clacking, like old bones hitting together in a leather bag. I followed. I don't know why. Maybe pride, maybe stubbornness. I circled the house and caught its trail at the tree line. The prints it left behind made my blood run cold. They weren't animal. No paw pads, no claw marks. But they sure as hell weren't human either. These were something else entirely. Long impressions with toes spread wide and elongated, almost like hands pressing down into the snow. I tracked wounded game through blizzards, followed bear sign across frozen rivers, but something about these prints made my hand shake as I loaded my rifle. Still, I followed that trail into the woods, moving as quiet as I knew how. I tracked it for a quarter mile through the dark pines before I started to lose my nerve. The forest had gone completely still around me, more quiet than I'd ever heard it. Even the owls had gone silent, and in 47 years I'd never known the woods to fall that quiet unless something very wrong was moving through them. Then I heard it just ahead. That same knocking sound, but not on wood this time. On trees. A hollow tapping that echoed through the forest, moving from trunk to trunk in a slow rhythm, as if it knew I was following and wanted to let me know exactly where it was. The sound had a playful quality that made my skin crawl, like a cat toying with a mouse. I froze. And then, it knocked again, 3 times. But this time it came from behind me. I didn't see it. I didn't dare turn. I just walked back to town real slow, rifle in hand. And I've never gone out after dark since. That was the last account I collected before leaving town. Each voice carried the same dread, the same memory of that clacking sound moving in the dark. And now, as autumn gives way to snow, the nights in Alaska are only growing longer. For a town where something walks after dark, knocking at windows and roofs, that feels less like a season and more like a sentence. Stay safe out there. If stories like this keep you up at night, subscribe, because there's always more in the archives. And if there's a tale you want to hear, leave a comment. Chances are, I've already got it waiting.